Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you so much for your attendance and for your attention to the course. Hope things have been going smoothly. And yeah, let's just keep going. Today, we have the next installment of our lecture series. We're going to try and talk more about the Gettier problem that we started to develop last class period. So as usual, I'll start off with a couple of points of review just to cover the things that were talked about on Tuesday. And then we'll add some new notes on this Gettier issue for today's meeting. This is our last virtual meeting. That's interesting. Next week on Tuesday, I'll see you guys live in person at the classroom. They've been sending me now these lists of students that are like not cleared to be on campus and stuff. And I do have significant numbers, but I'm assuming that must be because there are some students that haven't adhered to the testing protocols or something. First of all, everyone should get vaccinated. But if you aren't, you should definitely be getting those negative tests because the rule's going to get enforced. And I don't want people to be left out of class. So just make sure that you take care of that stuff on your side before Tuesday. Do whatever you got to do. But anyway, yeah, welcome everybody. And feel free to say good afternoon, good morning, or hello. That's my kind of also way of just keeping tabs on attendance, even though I'm not really monitoring it or anything. Thank you guys. Hi there, Riley, Han, Haley, Catherine, Yuki, Mateo, Elle, Samantha, Elias, Armand, Colin, Nick, Edwin, Alex, Aya. Hey, everybody. Good to see you guys again. Okay. Cool. Great. So let me just start off with some stuff that we talked about in the last couple of meetings, and then when we get to something new, then we'll just start to take a few new notes. I'll put some new things on the board. All right. So we're embarking on this journey to try and get closer to understanding what is knowledge and how can it be applied in all the different interesting areas of human life and experience. And to try and understand what knowledge is, it directs us all the way back to the world of ancient Greece. So the first written account of this in the Western tradition comes from the ancient philosopher Plato / Socrates, because Socrates is the teacher in a lot of these writings that Plato wrote. But Plato's the author. We talked about it. So first piece we read was the Meno. In the Meno, the ancient classical account of knowledge is set forth. And by now, it's probably familiar to you, but let's just repeat it one time. Who knows what was that definition of knowledge again? 3 conditions, JTV, yeah, perfect. Justified true belief. So truth is when a proposition matches the facts. Belief, when a person thinks that it does. Justification, when you have good evidence or reasons for believing it. So when all 3 of those conditions line up, you think something's true, it actually is, and it mirrors reality. And then you have reasonable evidence to think so, that would be having knowledge. In the dialogue by Plato, where Socrates talks about this with Meno, they get into this conversation about, like, why is it better to know as opposed to just having a correct opinion? The correct opinion was the terminology was used to refer to a true belief but doesn't have justification. So the question is, like, if you have a true belief but you have no evidence for it, why would it be better to actually know as opposed to just having that correct opinion? And they're talking about it in terms of like how to get to a city called Larissa. One person knows how to get there. Another person, suppose, just has a correct opinion but doesn't know. But wouldn't they still just be able to make it there or lead people correctly? Well, what Socrates ends up saying is the difference between knowledge and correct opinion is that knowledge is more stable because it's based with the justification. He gives this metaphor of statues where there were these mythical sculptures made by the sculptor named Daedalus. And people believed that if these sculptures were not tethered to the ground with ropes, then they would just get up and run away when you weren't looking because of how realistic they appeared. Now, these ropes were given as a metaphor by Socrates of the function of justification, because justification locks down and secures your true beliefs, your correct opinions, so that they don't leave your mind. Without the evidence to keep those true beliefs there, they will be forgotten, they won't be retained, or they'll just be changed. So the same is true of the statues. If you have one of these nice statues, it's here today, gone tomorrow, unless you have the ropes. And when you have a correct opinion, it's the same. It's just going to fly. It's fleeting. It's not going to be willing to stay long for your in your mind without some kind of grounds, without some foundations. So the ropes are like justification. They add durability and resilience to the true opinions that they justify, just like the Robes Ground statues. Okay, now from there we started to speak about this Gettier author, and his important contribution in 1963 is that he showed that justified true belief perhaps is not the right definition of knowledge. So let me go ahead and just remind us about some of the key points in at least what we've covered so far in Gettier. We have a little more to say on that. But Edmund Gettier lived from 1927 until 2021. Rest in peace, just last March he passed. In his paper from 1963 called Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? Okay, so we're going to take a second strong look here at the information in his article. We talked about one of his famous cases, and so let me just set the stage again. Edmund Gettier, American philosopher who taught for a long time at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, he wrote this one paper, and he published this one paper, and it's the only thing he ever published, which is also pretty unique and interesting because it's a short, very compact, 2-page paper. But in that short format, what he's able to show, as I was saying, is that the long-standing, thousands of years old definition of knowledge, justified true belief, is not fully adequate. To show that, he's trying to make the case that it's not sufficient to have justified true belief in order to have knowledge. In other words, you could have all of those conditions met and still not have knowledge, at least in certain examples. To sort of make the point then, he starts with a couple of preliminaries, and just don't want us to forget what those were. One of the preliminary points was that it's possible to have a justified false belief. Can anybody remember like an example where that might happen, where someone could have a justified false belief, or whether it's one we've talked about or something that you come up with now? Let me ask, like for the sake of discussion, what could be a situation where you'd have a justified false belief? Just take a second to think. Okay, if someone lies to you, or Matteo, you're talking about like the simple appearance of the Earth's surface from a standing position on it, that might give justification for a false belief that it's flat. If someone lies to you and they really have an elaborate backstory, maybe they even try to conceal the truth with overwhelming evidence, and that the effectiveness of the lie might induce in you a justified false belief. The thought that the sun goes around the Earth. Yes, from the surface of the Earth, we do appear motionless. And so those are all good examples, fine. Or if someone was framed for a crime they didn't commit, that I guess is a special case of deception too. All right, so we can have justified false beliefs sometimes. Hopefully, well, I would say definitively, it's not usually, but it can happen. The second preliminary point was this thing about the closure principle. And that took a little bit of work to explain. So just so it's clear and it's not lost on us, let's try and remember it again. The closure principle says that basically, if you are justified in believing one proposition, and then you deduce a second proposition from that, meaning that the first one entails the second, then what's the case with respect to the second proposition? Anybody remember that little piece of info? If you have justification for one thing and then it leads to another, then the second proposition is also justified. Very good, Matteo, yeah. So although it's a bit technical the way it sounds, if S is justified in believing that P entails Q, S deduces Q from P, then S is justified in believing the Q. Beneath all of the sophistry of that, it's just saying that when you have justification for thinking that something's true, then that justification will carry right over to a second statement that follows logically from it. Okay, so I was born in the 80s, that's a fact, now you know that, and since you're justified in believing that, you're justified in believing anything that must be true if that is true. So if I was born in the 80s, which is true, then it must be older than 30. And so your justification for the first proposition would serve just as well for the second. Okay. You say wrongful evidence can lead to a wrong conviction. That's another good example, good. There could be evidence that implicates someone in a crime that they didn't commit. We know there have been people who've been exonerated later by DNA evidence and stuff, but yet the jury was convinced well enough by the arguments and evidence presented in court that the person was guilty. So yeah, false conviction based on credible evidence could be another justified false belief. But anyway, yeah, to the closure principle, let's keep that one clear, right? Because those are two sort of separate points. But the closure principle, yes, does say that justification transmits through when you do entailment for a second proposition. Okay, now there are the Gettier examples. The first one, which we did try to talk about, was the Smith and Jones job hunt. And let's just brush up on that again before I move on to tell you about the other big Gettier case, and then we can discuss that as well. So in Gettier's first example, case 1, the Smith and Jones job hunt. Who are Smith and Jones? What are they doing? What is the whole point of them being referred to here? They're just two people that are doing what? Applying for a job, correct. So they're trying to get this job, and there's only one position open. They're the two finalists for that position, and only one of them is going to, be selected by the boss. So boss interviews them, and after the interviews, a few things happen which leads Smith to believe something. Now, let's see if we can get this out there. What's the first thing that Smith ends up believing? There's a proposition that was mentioned. Smith comes to believe that what? It's kind of in two steps. That Jones will get the job, right? That's right. Also, something else about Jones, that he has 10, you say cents, that's true, but 10 coins. So it could, 10 cents could be a dime, but it's like 10 individual coins, like of whatever kind. So, it could be like 10 quarters or 10 anything, but it's just 10 coins. Okay, yeah, shillings, whatever. So now, why does Smith believe that? Let's get that one clear as well. Smith believes these things for reasons. He has justification. Why does he think that Jones will get the job? Boss told him that, yeah. So the boss just directly tells Smith, yo, I'm hiring Jones. So, based on that, Smith now believes Jones will get the job. And also, why does Smith believe that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket? Like, how did he find that out? He did count them. Yeah, he literally just counted them. So, good. All right, now we got the reasoning behind why Smith believes this thing that says Jones gets the job and Jones has 10 coins. From there's this little closure principle step, which leads Smith to believe the second proposition is closely related to the first, just a slight difference in the way it's worded. And that's right. Again, thank you, Catherine. The man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. This is a belief that Smith now has. And why does he have it? Because it follows from the earlier belief. And since the first one was justified, this one is too. The statement there that you see in the chat, which says the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. All right. So Smith believes that. He's justified in believing that. What's the plot twist? How does it end? Boss was lying, and so boss, who does he give the job to? Smith gets the job. Surprise. But another surprise is that what? Big coincidence. He also has 10 coins, making proposition E true. Exactly. Okay, so what's the diagnosis, though, of the status of that proposition? Even though he has a belief in it, it's true and it's justified. It really doesn't seem to be what? It's not something that he actually knows. There you go. It's not knowledge. It's not a case of having knowledge, because although he does have this justified true belief, it is mere luck, coincidence, pure chance that it turned out true, because it's relying on information that has nothing to do with the real factors that make it true. You see, he was led to believe this by the misleading evidence that Jones would get the job and by the observation of the number of coins that Jones had. But the real reason that it is true is for things that he had no idea about, like that he had 10 coins, which he was totally unaware of, and that he himself got the job, which was what he did not think would happen. So although he gets it right, it's like he gets it right for the wrong reasons, and luck, according to most intuition, is not compatible with just getting something right by chance. So this example is supposed to prove the important point that you can't just say knowledge is justified true belief, because if it was, then we should call Smith someone who knows that statement. But given the circumstances described, it's not intuitively a case of knowledge. Now we're in a bit of a pickle, because we're not clear anymore on what knowledge is. If it's not justified true belief, what is it? It seems that it's justification, truth, and belief plus some extra mysterious missing ingredient that would prevent luck from being the reason that the proposition turns out to be true. But still, it's not clear. We haven't yet found the proper solution as to what would be this anti-luck condition. Did I talk to you guys about any other variations on Gettier cases? Let me ask you that, because if not, I do want to speak to a few of them. Or even if I did, I might repeat just a couple. I will. Okay, only Smith and Jones? Yeah, okay. So here, let me explain then maybe just a few others from everyday experience. Now, one issue with Gettier's article, it's not a real problem to me, or most philosophers don't find it difficult when the example is so unrealistic. Okay, Matteo, you got the car one. Okay, yeah, so let me repeat this car example because that's helpful. In a real life example, I was actually parked in a parking lot and I had to leave quickly to get to a classroom, so I was not paying 100% attention to like where I parked. When I got back to the parking lot, I was looking for my car and I saw what to all appearances I thought was my car, because my car was a black BMW. And when I arrived at the parking lot, I saw a car which I thought was mine because it was a black BMW. So I'm walking up close to it, and at that time I had this belief in mind. My car is in that aisle of the parking lot. Now, when I got up to that car, lo and behold, it wasn't mine. It was a different car with a very similar appearance. But when I got to that point, I noticed that 2 stalls over in the same aisle, a sight that I had not seen before, and that actually was my car. So my car was obscured from view. Therefore, my belief that my car was in that aisle was true. It was justified because of the decoy. But who really thinks I knew my car was in that aisle? So this is another case where I have a correct belief, but for a mismatching reason, I was led to believe a true thing, which is that my car is in that aisle, but because of the appearance of a different vehicle altogether. So it checks off all the boxes of the classical definition of knowledge, justified, true belief. But again, it doesn't seem to us to be a real instance where you knew, for example, that the car was in that aisle. Okay, now that's a real life Gettier case. Let me speak to a few others that are in the literature that are just out there. Is it really considered truth? How is it not truth, Yuki? What's the statement? The statement is my car is in that aisle. And then that was the fact. My car was in that aisle. Are you thinking, for example, that the first instance was me looking at the other car and thinking that's my car? Surely, yeah, I did think that's my car. But the proposition of interest is what I deduced from that. You get the closure principle, right? I looked at that car and I was justified in believing it was mine. And if it's mine, that entails that my car is right in there in that aisle. So I was also justified in believing the second proposition. So it's fair to say this, Yuki, I deduced a true proposition from a justified false belief, right? My justified false belief initially was that is I am looking at my car. Not true. I wasn't looking at my car. But the entailment from that is a related proposition. My car is in this aisle, which true enough it was, but just by coincidence it was, since I wasn't really looking at it to begin with. Does that make some better sense to you, Yuki, if I'm getting you clearly? Okay, cool, thank you. Now here, let me just run a few more of these examples through, and then we will actually talk about the actual second Gettier case, because there are 2 Gettier cases in his own essay, and we've so far just covered his one original, the Smith and Jones job hunt. But I'm hitting you with a couple of different looks, because the same type of format of example has been used across the board in so many different cases. So here's another one. Someone's driving down a road, and they look off to their right, and what they see to their right is, to all appearances, a barn, all right? Like, you all know this is the info about the essay that we're talking about today, so I'm gonna just clear that from the board since it's clear enough now. Okay, so this car is like cruising down the road here, you see, and there's a person inside driving, you know. They look off to the right, this way, and they see what to their eyes looks like it is a barn. You know, the old barn house door and all that. So in that field to the right, the person then develops a belief based on seeing this, that there's something in that field, namely what? If you could try to assert the proposition. Based on seeing this from the roadway, the individual just simply forms the normal belief that what? That there is a blank in the field. Yeah, sure, that there's a barn in the field, that's right. Pretty obvious. I mean, if you see what looks like a barn, it'll be like there's a barn over there. Easy. Now, here's the deal though. There's always this gettier sort of layer of like a plot twist or something unexpected. So how this one plays out is the following. Sorry. Get a little water. I had to buy a new hydro flask. You saw the white one, right? This is new. This is orange. Because I left it behind in my classroom on Tuesday. I couldn't believe that. One of the other campuses where I'm teaching in person. So going back in person, pay close attention to all your belongings. It's easy to forget. You're not used to being out there. Okay. So anyway, if he had gone outside and if he had the time to walk up to the so-called barn, here's what he would have seen on a closer inspection. This is actually not a barn. This isn't like art installation. It's just a facade which is designed to appear to be a barn from the road viewer's position. But if you got up to it, you would notice there's no interior, there's no depth. It's just one wall, and that does not have an actual barn. But, okay, here's the real plot twist. Behind the facade, there actually is real barn. Okay, this one, fake barn. So, yeah, you could say it's like a picture billboard, or I don't know, more creatively, it could just be like, modern art. Like someone wants to create an optical illusion of barns, and so they create just one wall, which from a viewer's position driving will certainly look that way to be a barn. But anyway, hidden behind this, which you can't see from the road, there is an actual barn. Nobody can see it though while they're driving. So anyway, what was the belief of our driver? Just to repeat it one time. I know we know it, but just to kind of engage with you for a moment. The belief of our driver is that what proposition? I think we've said it. There's a barn there in that field. Right. Now, is there a barn in that field? Is that true? Yes, it is true. And we can say that he had justification because the appearance of the decoy gave him good reason to think there was a barn there. It's not like he's just making it up out of nowhere, like for no reason. He has a reason. So he has a belief there's a barn? There is, and it's justified. So that's a what, a JTB, a justified true belief. But just try to think about the vibe. Do you feel like this man knows there's a barn over there? It seems like no, right? Because although he has a belief which is true, he would have formed the same belief if there had not been a barn there. So his intake of the belief is not even attentive to the fact that makes it true. It's based on the appearance of a fake barn. Now, although he gets it right, isn't it another case where he's just kind of lucky to get it right? Because had there not been the sort of saving grace of the real barn behind that facade, he would have just had a regular false belief. So once again, it's a justified true belief that doesn't seem to accurately be knowledge. Okay, maybe one more, and then I'll go over the second Gettier example with you guys real fast. Question from Colin. Is this just advocating that sense perception cannot be the sole evidence for justification? Well, I don't know, Colin, it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem to intuitive to say that he doesn't have justification, at least. The intuition on the table is that he doesn't know. But as we've said before, you can be justified in believing something false. If justification required that a belief based on it is 100% true in every case, then we would not have justification for a lot of things. Justification is easier than knowledge. You just have to have a reason to think something's true. So, I mean, I guess, Colin, what you are thinking is, let's just deny he has justification, and then it doesn't satisfy the definition of knowledge. It's just a true belief, but it doesn't have evidence. But having evidence is different from having perfect evidence that rules out the possibility of error, So I would say that sense perception is certainly justificatory. If it wasn't, then that would have spillover effects that are, I think, too pessimistic about the possibility of perceptual knowledge. Like when I'm looking at this hydro flask, I know it's there, And the reason I know it's there is because I believe it, it's true, and I'm justified in believing it's there by the perception I have of it. So perception is generally reliable, and it does usually lead to true beliefs. So it's good evidence for the things that you believe based on it. Although, of course, we can hallucinate, we can be having sleep deprivation, or we can see something that is not the actual object and we misperceive it. That's all possible. Now, Colin, you're asking this: what defines perfect evidence, empirical and rational observations together? Well, I just used a phrase kind of offhand. I just made the phrase up. I don't know. Perfect evidence is just whatever you think it is. It would be like evidence that is so good that it cannot possibly lead you into a false belief. But again, it's kind of a moot point because you don't need that to have justification. Justification doesn't have to guarantee that the proposition is true. It just has to give you solid reason to think it's true. I don't know, perfect evidence. So like one case might be the evidence that you exist just because you're thinking, like Descartes talked about. We'll talk about that actually next week because we're going to study some of the Descartes material. But other than that, the world of perception is something that's always fallible. Are you living in the matrix right now, my friend? You don't know. But we're not usually that skeptical in the ordinary course of affairs. We just trust our perception because we think that it's connected to reality in the right way. Okay, but good, very good. Thank you. So let me give you just one more random Gettier case, and then I'll give you another of Gettier's actual cases that he wrote about. Because in his own literature, there's just the two. But after he wrote that paper, it spawned like an infinity of different examples from all kinds of authors. So, okay, here's one more. This one was written about by Robert Nozick, which we will actually touch on this example ourselves next week. But here's how it basically goes. So someone's on all kinds of like drugs, and they're seeing things, you know, they're hallucinating. So while they're tripping and hallucinating, they look out in front of them in the room and they see what they think is an elephant. So based on that hallucinatory image, they come to believe basically that there's what in the room? Just to make sure you're getting it. An elephant, right. So that's their belief at this time. There is an elephant in the room. Now, in this hypothetical, imagine this. Behind like a partition in the room, which they cannot see into, there actually is like a little baby elephant sleeping, okay? So maybe this is like a, I don't know, someone at an animal sanctuary hallucinating, but the point is, the belief was what? That there's an elephant in the room. They thought that was true. And is it true? Well, yeah, it is actually. But it's not true for the reason they thought. They thought that it was true because they thought they were seeing one in front of them, but that was just an illusion. But there actually is one in the same room as a sight unseen. It's kind of like my car example again with a slight twist, if you will. So yet again, we have an example where it doesn't seem right to say this guy knows there's an elephant in the room. He has a belief that there is, sure. It's justified to some extent by the hallucination he's having. And it is true, but it's not something known because the evidence he has is unrelated to the real elephant that's there. You know, he's deriving the evidence from this perceptual hallucination instead of from the real thing. And as I say that, just another one randomly came up to me. This one's pretty realistic too, and this can happen to people. So suppose that like you're looking at a table and what you see on the table you think is a knife, so you believe there's a knife on the table. But what you were looking at was like just one of those like Halloween costume knives. It's not a knife. It just kind of looks like it from where you're standing. But underneath like a piece of paper on that table, there's what? If you're just sort of getting the feel for these cases, you'll probably be able to tell me what a real knife. Yeah, a real knife is present there, but it wasn't perceived by the person. The actual perception they had was of something that did appear to be a knife, but it wasn't. So again, we have a case where there's a belief, it's true, justified, but it's not real knowledge because of the fluky, weird, coincidental mismatch between the real thing that makes the statement true and then whatever evidence the person used to get there. All right. So what all the examples sort of have in common is that there's an epistemic agent who believes something on a reasonable basis, which turns out to be true, but for like an unexpected reason, for a different reason than the one that they relied on in coming to that belief. And it shows us that you can have a justified true belief without knowledge. And if that's the case, we don't have the right definition yet. The right definition of knowledge should be one where if all the conditions are satisfied, there will never be a failure of knowledge. As stated, the definition is in some way incomplete, and it's waiting for an additional set of criteria, or at least one additional condition, to fix the definition and make it the proper one. Okay. Now, Yuki, you say, is it the lack of focus on details when proposing? I don't know. I mean, in some cases, you might accuse the person of not being focused enough as they take in the information that they've used for justification. But in some cases, it's really through no fault of your own. It's not through irresponsibility, perhaps, that you arrive at this justified but nonetheless false belief, or this justified true belief that's disconnected from the real factors that make the statement true. So I don't think we can say it's always due to lack of focus, but in some of the examples I've given you, maybe that's fair. Certainly in the case of Smith, we can't really say that he didn't focus. I mean, he just heard what the boss told him. No greater amount of focus would have led him to think something else. And he just counted the coins that Jones had, and he got the right count. So it's not necessarily in that case. Oh, lack of details in the proposal. I think now I understand what you're saying, Yuki. Sorry. You mean like there needs to be a more detailed accounting of knowledge beyond just justified true belief. Okay, yeah, fair enough. I would think it's not necessarily lacking in a ton of detail. I mean, 3 different conditions, each one well articulated and well defined. But the problem, again, it's coming into focus, right? Like, even if that seems like an initial good definition of knowledge, once you probe into it a little further and you think about these weird counterexamples, you can dream up situations, some realistic, some a little less realistic. But anyway, you can imagine these scenarios where someone matches all the conditions or criteria and still is short of having knowledge. So we want the right definition so that when it's satisfied, there won't be these counterexamples. Okay, and that additional condition basically is going to be something that prevents luck from intervening to make the justified belief true. But it's hard to exactly define or specify what this anti-luck condition would look like. We'll take a few stabs at it, though, as we go forward from here. Okay, well, I told you there's 2 Gettier cases, right? So now the first one, the original, the OG one, is Smith and Jones job hunt. But then there is this second one that's in his own paper, and we can't let it go. So let me go through that as well. So this is Gettier case 2. And just so that it has a name we can remember, I guess, I'll call it Smith, Jones, Brown, and Barcelona. Okay, Smith, Jones, Brown, and Barcelona. Bit of an odd title, but it'll make sense as we go through some of the basics of the case. Okay, now, once again, we imagine that there are these 2 characters, Smith and Jones. And now in this example, they are actually co-workers at the same office. So they both work at one office, and there are 2 employees there. Now, Smith, the first guy, he has this belief about his buddy Jones. What Smith believes is that Jones owns a Ford car. Okay, Jones owns a Ford. That's what Smith believes. So I'm just going to write that here. Now, there's a backstory about why Smith believes this statement. And it's for just very straightforward reasons. It's because Jones pulls up to work every day in a Ford, driving that Ford. Jones talks nonstop about his Ford car. He's like, I love Fords. I'm a Ford man. You guys want to take a ride in my Ford? I'll give you a ride home. Ford's all I drive. I definitely own one. I love it. Ford, Ford, Ford. So like that's Jones. He's just constantly talking and going off about the Ford that he has or that he claims that he has. And you can see him pull up to work in it, and he does like give people rides in it. Even Smith has taken a ride home from Jones before when he propositioned him, would you like to have a ride in the Ford? So based on all those experiences, there's just ample evidence to back up the thought that Jones owns a Ford. So Smith does believe that. That part I hope just comes through pretty clear. It's easy enough. Smith believes Jones, his coworker, owns a Ford based on all that stuff. Now, the next part of this example, though, is definitely a little bit trickier. So let me just make sure that we do it clear and carefully. it involves this feature in logic about the way that a certain kind of sentence works, which are called disjunctions. So I need to teach you some elementary stuff about a logical rule and a certain type of sentence in logic and grammar. So this is the word I'm referring to, disjunction. Now, what a disjunction is an either-or sentence, okay? Or you could say an either-or proposition, but we'll say sentence for the moment. So, an either or sentence. An either-or sentence. Now, the form of a disjunction, just the generic structure that it always has, is like this. A sentence that reads out either A or B. Now, I'm using A and B there as just like, you know, like in math, like variables, which stand for whatever the informational content could be that you would plug in there. And the terminology that's used here is that in every disjunction, there are two disjuncts, all right? The first disjunct is the info that is to the left of the word or, so that's A. And the second disjunct, or we could say the right disjunct, the right-hand disjunct, is the one that is to the right of the word or. So like these terms A and B, they flank the word or on the left and right. The left side, that's the first disjunct. The right side afterward, that's the right-hand disjunct. So let me go ahead and just give you one example to think about. Take this sentence as one particular instance of this form. I will either walk to school or ride my bike. Now, in this disjunction example, just to make sure this is clear, what would be the first disjunct? What information is the first disjunct of this example? That what? That I will walk to school. Yes, exactly. So that's like the first disjunct. And what is it disjoined to? What is the second disjunct in this case? Just to make sure it's all there. That I will ride my bike. Correct. Okay, so when you have an or sentence like that, I will either have pizza or tacos for lunch. I will either major in chemistry or biology. Whatever the case is, that's why A and B are used in the generic form of it, because it could be indefinitely many examples. But when you have such a disjunction, let me ask you all a question based on just logic and common sense. How many of the two disjuncts do you think would have to be true for the whole statement to be true? So there are two disjuncts, but how many have to be true? Exactly one, at least one. They don't have to both be true for the disjunction to be true because it only claims one or the other. Now, there's another type of sentence which is called a conjunction, and that's an and sentence, which has a different logic. When I say A and B, that requires the truth of both. So if I told you that I'm majoring in chemistry and biology, that means that I have both majors and I'm double majoring. But if I tell you that I'm going to major in either chemistry or biology, it's still true if I'm majoring just in chemistry but not biology, or just biology and not chemistry, right? Clearly enough. So an interesting thing then, from the point of view of logic, is that if there's one disjunct that is true, if there's one statement that is true, then that statement or anything else is also true, because the second disjunct, whatever it is, it's irrelevant to the truth of the whole statement if at least the first one is a fact. So like, I'm wearing glasses, that's true. Is it also true that either I'm wearing glasses or the moon is made of cheese? Is that true? Yes, it is. And why is it true? It's true just because of the first half of the disjunction. Never mind that the moon is not made of cheese. That certainly is false. But I didn't say that both I'm wearing glasses and the moon is made of cheese. I said this or that. Okay, so this little bit of explanation here. Yeah, it only claims one to be the truth at minimum. If I say to you that I'm going to have either an apple or a banana in my lunch bag, and I have an apple in there but no banana, it's not like I told you a lie, because I didn't claim that they would both be present. I said this or that. And so it's compatible and consistent with that it's just one of the two things that is a fact, but not the other. So taking a step back then into our example, we already explained that Mr. Smith believes this, that Jones owns a Ford. And since Smith is like just so good at logic and stuff, and he knows all these logical rules, he knows that this or anything else will also be justified. See, this is something that Smith's justified in believing, and according to the closure principle, if you're justified in believing one statement and then it entails another, then likewise you would be justified in believing the second statement. So this entails disjunctions, where it's the first member of the two disjuncts. So what he ends up doing, Smith, and this part is just kind of bizarre and a little arbitrary, but anyway, Smith says that since he's justified in believing that Jones owns a Ford, he's going to form three beliefs, which are all going to be disjunctions, and Jones owns a Ford is going to be the first disjunct of the three disjunctions. So now we have these three beliefs of Smith, labeling them A, B, and C. They all start off the same. Jones owns a Ford, or okay, now I'm going to fill in the second disjunct of each three, but this requires another little explanation. So Smith has this other friend named Brown, and it's like a long-lost friend that he's lost contact, he's lost touch with. But he has no idea where in the world Brown is, since they haven't talked for so long. But since he has justification that Jones owns a Ford, he now forms these three beliefs where the first disjunct is that Jones owns a Ford, and the second one refers to the present location of Mr. Brown. Again, Smith totally has no idea where Brown is, so he just, at random, picks three places and says that's the location of Brown. So now we have these three. Jones owns a Ford, or Brown is in Boston. That's the A proposition. B, Jones owns a Ford, or Brown is in Barcelona. And then the third one is Jones owns a Ford, or Brown is in, and this is a little bit of a more obscure piece of geography, Brest-Litovsk. I guess this is an Eastern European capital somewhere, but it had some significance in the aftermath of World War I. But anyway, Jones owns a Ford, or Brown is in Brest-Litovsk. Okay. Now, here we get to the little plot twist. All this setup is necessary before we can say what it is. Now, here's the way it actually plays out. This guy Jones, that Smith thinks owns a Ford, his coworker, this is a big elaborate hoax. Jones does not own a Ford. So the situation is this. Jones has been faking it. He's renting the Ford car. It's a rental. He doesn't own it. And he's been posturing and posing like that's his car to anybody that will listen. And so because of that elaborate, ruse, Smith has been convinced that Jones owns a Ford, but it's not true. Okay, so the first disjunct of all three is false. Jones doesn't own a Ford, contrary to all appearances. But, and here's where the little Gettier plot twist happens, it's just randomly true and a total coincidence. Brown right now happens to be in Barcelona. So his old friend Brown, he's chilling in Barcelona watching bullfight or something. And so which of the three propositions actually is true in the end? A, B, C, which one? B, it's true. And did Smith believe it? Yes, he did believe it. And was he justified in believing it? Well, yes, in the technical sense that he's justified in believing that Jones owns a Ford. And since that logically entails that either Jones owns a Ford or anything, fill in the blank, that means that this is actually a justified true belief. But once again, the intuition of Gettier and all the commentators that have read it is that still is not knowledge. So it's another example of like JTB that is not K. Because although he has a justified true belief, it's just a matter of luck that it's true. His evidence that leads him to believe this only refers to the false disjunct. But the fact which makes the disjunction true has to do with the other disjunct, which he has no information about. So once again, we see an individual get a justified true belief completely based on luck. And real knowledge, according to all, is something that can't happen just by the intervention of luck. So we have to then revise and reconsider the old school definition of knowledge that stood for so many thousands of years in light of the work of Gettier. And in these two short, very compact examples, he was able to challenge and really overturn centuries, millennia worth of thinking about the topic of knowledge. So it's fascinating, even though the cases that he uses are a little bit fanciful and unrealistic. There's others that I gave you that have a bit more of a realistic feel, like seeing an object on the table, thinking it's a knife. There's a real knife there, but you didn't see it, or the car, the parking lot example. Whatever example you care to use to advance this idea, the point is deep, and it's actually a little bit disturbing, because you would hope that we would know what knowledge is. It's something that lies right at the centerpiece of so much of human life, and abstract thinking, and even just concrete decision making every day in a practical sense. But if we're not clear on what knowledge is, then there's a real gap lying right at the heart of one of the most fundamental concepts of all human life. So we really would like to get a better fix on the definition. And since Gettier published this piece in 1963, we're all spinning our wheels in different directions trying to get the right definition, but not having total success just yet. Now, I'm going to speak about one more quick little Gettier case, and then I actually want to show you a little video presentation here on the shared screen so that we can kind of get a multimedia look at some of the same examples I've been talking to you about. Sure, Yuki, question there.
Can this, my question about this is that, can this really be like considered like a conjunction, or can it be, it feels more like a listing, because like I feel like a conjunction is usually used to like narrow down the idea, I guess.
Well, let's get the terminology right. Are you saying conjunction or disjunction?
Wait, can you say that one more time?
Well, you said just now conjunction, but I think you mean disjunction.
Disjunction? Okay.
Like you're talking about the either or sentences?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wait, no, you're right. So this conjunction is when you are narrowing it down to two options.
So the term is disjunction. So let me just clarify the terminology. It's no big deal, but yeah, like a disjunction is an either or, this or that, yeah? A conjunction is an and statement, which says this and that both. So if I tell you like, I'm going to order or in my lunch bag, I have a banana and an apple, that means that I have both items. If I say in the lunch bag I have either a banana or an apple, it means maybe it's one or the other. So disjunction, either. Conjunction, like in Spanish, con means together. So maybe that helped you think of it. But anyway, yeah, back to your question though. Anyway.
So then my question is like how this could be used as like evidence for lack of knowledge, because it's like, in a sense, the information, Brown being in Barcelona and Jones owning a Ford, is kind of just like an information that just doesn't have any relation. Like,
no, they don't have any relation at all, but that's okay, because as we've explained, in a disjunction, there does not have to be any relevance between the two things. So you're thinking like a normal disjunction is, my friend is either going to arrive from terminal 1 or terminal 2 at the airport, and you're like narrowing it down to 2, and you just know it's got to be one of the two. So there's something that's related between this and that. That what you mean? Okay, yeah, but that's not required. A disjunction can have any two things. I could say to you right now that either I will go for a run, or I will eat a hamburger, and those two things are like far different. Or I could say either I own a cat, or President Biden will lose re-election. That's also a disjunction, just based on the logical format of the statement. Any sentence which has or in the middle is a disjunction. So basically, I understand your question. You're like thinking these are weirdo like disjunctions, where one thing is about a guy owning a car and the other is totally randomly about a person's whereabouts in the world. But don't be thrown off by that. It's still a disjunction. And it's still the case that if one of those two disjuncts was true, then the whole disjunction would be true no matter what. So like right now you're watching a lecture on Zoom. And that means that either you're watching this lecture on Zoom or there's life in outer space. We don't even have to worry about the conditions for the truth of the second part, because we've secured the fact in the first. And or doesn't claim that both things are true, merely that at least one is. So there's nothing much I can do to change that little feature of the analysis that is given here, because that's something that's deeply rooted in just logic and grammar. No, it is not the case that a disjunction has to include two disjuncts that bear relevance to each other. But in ordinary conversation, when we talk and write to each other, normally we will have disjunctions that have similarities in the two disjuncts, because there would be no point in raising an issue outside of like a logical analysis of a concept like this in real life, you know? So like, you're probably never going to walk up to someone and say like, either I'm wearing a sweater or there's an even number of grains of sand at the beach at Newport. But it's just not about being realistic. It's just about analyzing the concept of the disjunction purely in a logical sense. Okay.
So can it still be a disjunction if both statement is false?
It would be a disjunction, but it would be false in that case. So like if I told you right now that I either own a dog or a pig, that's false, because I do not own either one. Or here, a better example. Someone tells you that they're going to either have pizza or tacos for lunch, but then they get sushi. So that wasn't true. They said one or the other, but it was neither. So you can have a disjunction where both pieces are false, but then it's a false disjunction. The truth conditions for a disjunction are that at least one of the two disjuncts are really factually true. So surely there could be false disjunctions, yes. Yeah. But both pieces would have to be not true to the facts in that case. Does that help you a little bit?
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
Well, what is it that's bothering you? You do not like the example of Gettier, or what?
I don't know, maybe. I think it's just kind of like way too I guess in a sense like random to conclude like knowledge in this way, I guess. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, okay, I know what you mean, sort of. But like, keep in mind, this is not the only Gettier case. It's not like he just says Jones and Brown and that's it. There's the Smith and Jones job hunt. There's all the other ones that I talked to you about. So if one of them doesn't really hit for you, then just switch to a different one. But they all make the same point. You understand that?
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, it's not a criticism, but I don't want you to get lost, because if you're having that feeling now, it's going to keep coming on, because the cases just keep getting weirder and more unrealistic. I mean, we're talking about people seeing elephants. We're talking about people seeing fake barns. So none of this is realistic, but it's not about that. It's about analyzing a concept, and these examples help us to focus the mind on the concepts alone. The real-world application of them, of course, happens, but the analysis of it requires sometimes thought experiments, hypothetical scenarios, you know. I try my best to make the hypotheticals a little more realistic than Gettier, because I'm aware as a teacher that some of the highly artificial claims included in his examples don't resonate with many people. As a philosopher, that's not a problem to me. But as a beginning student in philosophy, I can totally relate to you sitting back and thinking, man, but he's making these big points about knowledge by using the most esoteric and far removed from any realistic scenario situations possible. That is why I try my best to give you like alternatives to the same examples. And in the literature, there's so many, some realistic, some less realistic. I know for students it probably helps when they're a little more realistic, but I have to work with the material that's given. And it is widely considered that Gettier's paper is a classic, and it's like one of the most cited papers in world history. So that's the reason I have to teach it. It's right there at the core of the concept of the class. Mateo, you say this: disjuncts A and C seem irrelevant to Smith's conclusion. You mean disjunctions A and C? Yeah, these two don't refer to anything true, because Jones doesn't own a Ford and Brown is also not in Boston or in Brest-Litovsk. So A and C, in a way, it's like, why did he present them? They're just false beliefs. Yeah, they're not in any way candidates for knowledge. But this one, of course, is, because it's believed true for this technical reason that the second disjunct is true, and justified for the technical reason that you only need evidence for one disjunct for the whole thing to be justified. Okay. Now, I was going to tell you one last little Gettier case before we go to this video thing. I'll just run this one off quickly because the video talks about it too. But okay, now we got Smith and Jones again. No, sorry, different case. There's two people that work in the same office. One's name is Nogot, and the other one's name is Habit. And those names will make more sense in a moment. Anyway, Nogot, he's kind of like Jones in this example. He poses as he owns a Ford. He tells everybody, I own a Ford, look at my Ford, you want to ride, blah, 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 here's the keys. So based on that, the boss, looking at his workers, he thinks that Jones owns that, Nogot owns that Ford, is what the boss believes. And from there, he infers that one of my employees owns a Ford. Okay, so the given proposition here is the boss believes one of my employees owns a Ford, and he's actually justified in believing that because of all the evidence that is assessed by looking at no-got. But here's the little plot twist. There's another worker at the office, and his name is Habit, and he actually owns a Ford, but he doesn't even drive it to work. He keeps it in the garage and he rides his bike to work. So everybody thinks that someone in the office owns a Ford because it looks like no-got has, and that's the belief that the boss has. So ask us now about the belief of the boss. He believes that one of my employees owns a Ford, and is it true? Yes, it is, because Habit has it. Now you understand the names. No-got has named this to make it memorable because no-got does not got the Ford. Habit has it. And so, yes, one of the employees owns a Ford. The boss believed it, and he had evidence to believe it. Maybe this example is a little bit easier for us to maybe process, or Yuki, if you like this one, I think this one's pretty clear. Boss just believes one of my employees owns a Ford. Why wouldn't he? It seems like it is because of the posturing and behavior of no-got. But actually Habit does. And so once again, boss believes one owns a Ford. They do. He's justified in believing that, but it's not knowledge. Come on, we could not say he knows that one of his employees owns a Ford because, again, it's the same pattern. It's evidence which is derived for the proposition, but which is unrelated to the factor that makes it true. The fact that makes this statement true has to do with Habit, but the reason that the boss believes it has nothing to do with Habit, and instead has to do with no-got, who doesn't really have one. Okay, so we'll be moving on to some new articles and information along these same lines next week. But before we get there, I did say I wanted to show you this quick video. So on the recorded version of this lecture that I'll post later, as I have been, this is where that recording is going to cut off because I have a YouTube stream filming this same meeting right now, and that will not be able to share a screen. So when you watch the playback, you'll see that it ends here. So a little bit artificial, but I'm going to say to the camera over there, hey guys, thanks, and enjoy the next installment. I'll see you in class, but I'm ending that stream. We're staying on Zoom. Okay.